everyone. Today I will be reading you one of my favorite books. Well, I'll be reading you just a little tiny section from one of my favorite books, The Year of Living Biblically by A.J. Jacobs. It is a hilarious account of taking the Bible literally for a year and trying to live by it, essentially. Though most Christians don't take the Bible literally, obviously there are some evangelicals that would disagree. It's nice to see someone with an explorative eye tackle religion and the Bible in a humorous way, open-mindedly. The book cover sleeve says that A.J. Jacobs is the editor-at-large of Esquire. He is also the author of America Offline. In addition to being the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Know-It-All, he also contributes to NPR's Weekend Edition, among other things. See ajjacobs.com for more information. So without further ado, here is day 40 from The Year of Living Biblically by A.J. Jacobs. Enjoy. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Day 40. When I told my friend Ivan, a good Catholic, that I was considering visiting a Creationist museum, he let out a loud groan. Those people give Christianity a bad name. I understand what he's saying. It's the way many Jews feel when we see a billboard proclaiming Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson as the Messiah. Or the way many gay men feel when they see Rip Taylor tossing a handful of confetti. It's kind of embarrassing. Like Ivan, I've always taken evolution to be a cold, hard truth. As indisputable as the fact that the sun is hot and that Charles Darwin married his first cousin, the latter of which I learned in the encyclopedia and can't get out of my head. But creationism is biblical literalism at its purest, so I need to check it out. I researched various creationist hotspots, both Jewish and Christian, and I found a handful of possibilities. But nothing came close to a huge structure perched on a gentle Kentucky hill. There lies the Creation Museum, the Louvre of those who believe God made Adam less than 6,000 years ago from dust. Its founders are an evangelical group called Answers in Genesis. A note on timing. I'll be talking more with evangelicals, both conservative and liberal, in month 9 when my New Testament portion begins. But since creationism is so tied to the Old Testament's Genesis, I'm doing it early. The Creation Museum is still under construction. It's slated to open after my year ends, which is fine by me. There's something appropriate about seeing the creation of a creationist museum. So I fly down to Cincinnati, a few miles from the site. At the airport, I realize once again how deeply biblical symbolism has seeped into every nook in my brain. As I exit, I see a strange FAA sign that warns ominously, "Don't look back." It doesn't say how you'd be punished if you do. I'm guessing body cavity search, not getting turned into a pillar of salt. But I still find it a bizarre echo of God's warning to Lot as he fled the destruction of Sodom. Do not look back. A half hour later, I pull up to the museum, a low building fronted by thick yellow columns. In the parking lot, I spot a bumper sticker of a Jesus fish gobbling up a Darwin fish. I'm greeted by publicist Mark Louis, a gray-haired man with a gentle schoolteacher voice, who guides me to a door that lets us into the lobby. The lobby is, in a word, awesome. The museum is still a work in progress. Hard hats everywhere, the smell of sawdust, the whine of drills. But even in this unfinished state, you can tell this is going to send the media into a Michael Jackson trial-like frenzy. The first thing I see is a life-size diorama of an Eden-like scene. There's a waterfall, a stream, a cypress tree. An animatronic caramel-skinned cave girl giggles and cocks her head to look straight at me, which is odd and impressive and disturbing all at once. She's playing awfully close to a fierce-looking razor-toothed T-Rex. Don't worry, Mark tells me, in the beginning, humans and dinosaurs lived together in harmony. The T-Rex's scary incisors are for coconuts and fruits, just like a panda's teeth. When the museum opens, the Answers in Genesis folks expect thousands of visitors, and it'll probably get them. Polls say that as many as 45% of Americans believe in creationism, not intelligent design. We're talking strict, the earth is less than 10,000 years old creationism. The creationists I met scoffed at intelligent design, the theory that the world was designed by a superior being, but not necessarily in 7 literal days. The creationists think of this as some sort of nebulous theological mumbo-jumbo. Mark introduces me to Ken Ham, the founder of Answers in Genesis. Ken is a wiry and energetic 56-year-old with a gray Van Dyke beard. Ken quizzes me about my last book, the one about reading the encyclopedia, and I end up telling him about my ill-fated appearance on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I was stumped by the question, what is an erythrocyte? It's a red blood cell, says Ken. He's right. I'm thrown off guard. A creationist who trumps me in science knowledge? That's unexpected and unsettling. Ken was born into religious parents in Queensland, Australia, and still has a thick Aussie accent despite his 20 years in America. We start walking through the rooms. The guy who designed the American Museum also designed the Jaws attraction at the Universal theme park, Ken says, and it shows. The place is professional. We stroll past more than a dozen robotic dinosaurs, a statue of Eve with her flowing hair placed conveniently over her pert breasts, a partly built ark, a room with a circular slope like New York's Guggenheim Museum, a subtle reminder of man's fall from paradise, a theater with sprinklers to simulate the flood, a huge crocodile, a prop from the secular movie Crocodile Dundee, the future home of a talking Paul robot, a medieval castle-themed bookstore, medieval because the dragons of medieval times were actually still living dinosaurs. As we pass by the statue of a Roman centurion and the currently headless giraffe, I ask Ken the questions he's been asked 1,000 times. If Adam and Eve gave birth to 2 boys, Cain and Abel, how did Cain and Abel have kids? That's an easy one. Adam and Eve didn't just have Cain and Abel. It says in Genesis 5:4 that Adam had other sons and daughters. When it says day, does that mean a literal 24-hour day? Yes, he says, you've got to go back to the original word in Hebrew, which is yom. It's the same word that's used for 24-hour day. If you don't take that to mean day, it's a slippery slope. What about scientific dating that says the world is millions of years old? 90% of age dating methods are faulty, he says. Which version of the Bible do you use? Usually the King James, but you have to be careful with other translations. Ken explains that, for instance, many versions say the rabbit chews its cud, Leviticus 11:6. The skeptics say that rabbit doesn't chew its cud. But you look at the original language, it says the rabbit re-eats its food. And look at what a rabbit does. It excretes rabbit pellets and then eats the pellets. The Bible is correct, he proudly states. We walk into a room with a brick wall covered with menacing-looking graffiti. This room is devoted to modern ills, among them drugs and racism. There's only one race, the human race, Ken says. The creationists I meet are surprisingly liberal on race matters. Racial intermarriage is considered just fine. In fact, they think that Darwin's theory can lead to racism because minorities are sometimes seen as lower forms of Homo sapiens on the evolutionary scale. They are also progressive on Darfur. On other topics, including abortion and gay marriage, they are down-the-line conservatives. We pass a dinosaur with a saddle on it. This display was mocked by my own magazine, Esquire, which called it a dressage dinosaur because of the English saddle. Ken downplays it. It's just a novelty, just something for the kids, he ushers me through. This way, AJ. That's one thing I notice. They say AJ here a lot. It seems common among certain types of very religious people to say your name all the time. It makes me think of God's first words to Moses, which were Moses, Moses, but it's probably unrelated. Speaking of dinosaurs, if they really were on the ark, as creationists claim, how did Noah squeeze them all in? He put them in when they were younger and smaller, the equivalent of teenagers, says Ken. I later bought a paperback at the museum bookstore called Noah's Ark, a feasibility study. which spends 300 pages outlining the brilliant engineering that made the boat possible. There are chapters on the Ark's ventilation system, methods of onboard exercise for the animals, and the myth of explosive manure gases. The book is beautifully argued, and I don't believe a syllable of it, which I know is counter to my quest. I had told Mark, the publicist, that I was coming in with an open mind, but while down there, I realized my mind wasn't open that far. I could understand being open to the existence of God and the beauty of rituals and the benefits of prayer. But the existence of a juvenile brontosaurus on the Ark and an Earth that's barely older than Gene Hackman? I have to go with 99% of scientists on this one. Of course, the creationists cite plenty of scientific evidence of their own, or more precisely, they interpret the same evidence as being proof of creationism. Mark told me about a T-Rex bone in Montana that broke open and had blood vessels. No way that could be millions of years old, he said. The article Esquire ran was called "Greetings from Idiot America," and it was very funny. But I have to disagree with the headline. The answers in Genesis folks aren't idiots. And despite a British news show that scored its segment with Deliverance-style banjo music, they aren't hillbillies. Everyone I met had a full set of well-orthodontured teeth and blinked at regular intervals. I can't prove it, but I'd wager there's no difference in the average IQ of creationists and evolutionists. The thing is, their faith in the literal Bible is so strong, they will squeeze and distort all data to fit the Genesis account. In fact, you have to be quite sharp to be a leading creationist. The mental gymnastics can be astonishing. Consider AIG's resident astrophysicist, Jason Lisley. Mark introduced me to him proudly, a real live PhD who believes in creationism. Here he is in 3D, said Mark. Jason has meticulously parted hair, looks a bit like Paul Rubens, and is sweet in an unforced way. He tells me it wasn't easy being a creationist PhD student. He had to stay closeted about his beliefs and write for the AIG magazine under a pseudonym. Now here's the interesting part. Like mainstream scientists, he thinks the universe is billions of light years big. But if it's that big and only 6,000 years old, the light rays from distant stars wouldn't have time to travel to Earth. Shouldn't the night sky be black? That's a tough one, he says, but it's not a killer. There are several possibilities. Number one, the speed of light may not have always been 186,000 miles per second. Perhaps it was faster when the universe began. 2. Time zone analogy. You can leave Kentucky at 5 p.m. and arrive in Missouri at 4 p.m. In the same way, there may be something to continuous time zones in space. And number 3, something called gravitational time dilation. I didn't quite understand it, but it had to do with our galaxy having a special place in the universe. After Jason, the astrophysicist, I'm brought across the hall to meet another creationist named Carl Kirby. Carl is a big guy. Turns out his dad was a pro wrestler. He's wearing a Hawaiian shirt and gives off a casual feet-on-the-desk vibe. His specialty? He is the Creation Museum's resident expert on pop culture. Carl monitors movies and TV shows for subtle or not so subtle pro-evolution content so that he can alert fellow creationists to the danger. On his list, Finding Nemo. Namely, the line, "Give it up, old man, you can't fight evolution, I was built for speed." And Gilligan's Island. They use the word prehistoric twice in one episode. There's no such thing as prehistoric, Carl says. Other violators include Bugs Bunny, Lilo and Stitch, Bob the Builder, and the incredible Mr. Limpet. It used to be my favorite movie, he says of Limpet. And then I played it for my family, and 13 minutes in, there was a nerdy science guy who pulls up a chart and starts talking about how fish were our ancestors. I had to stop the movie and talk to my family and explain. Of course, when it comes to secular entertainment, creationism's enemy number one is Inherit the Wind, about the famous Scope's Monkey Trial. It debuted as a play in 1955 and was later turned into a Spencer Tracy movie, and Carl, along with all his colleagues, insists that it's wildly unfair to Christians. When I got home, I rented the movie and compared it to the actual court transcripts. And I have to say, the movie is wildly unfair to Christians, or at least to this strain of Christianity. William Jennings Bryan, a deeply religious, 3-time Democratic presidential nominee who was the prosecuting attorney for the anti-evolutionary folks, was turned into a total buffoon named Matthew Harrison Brady, played by Frederick March. Brady is a pot-bellied glutton, prone to burping and smacking his lips. In one scene, he's gorging on fried chicken out of a basket in the courtroom. The film recreates the famous showdown over the Bible between Bryan and the brilliant Chicago lawyer Clarence Darrow. It's a good scene, but if you read the court transcript, it was actually a more interesting and subtle confrontation. For instance, here's the dialogue in the movie. Darrow: "Do you believe every word of the Bible is true?" Bryan: "Yes, every word is literally true." And here's the corresponding real exchange. Darrow: "Do you claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted?" Bryan: "I believe everything in the Bible should be accepted as it is given there. Some of the Bible is given illustratively. For instance, ye are the salt of the earth. I would not insist that man was actually salt or that he had flesh of salt, but it is used in the sense of salt as saving God's people." Like Creationist today, he admits that there is some figurative language in the Bible, even if most of it should be taken as literally true. And he had wit. Quote, "I believe the Bible was inspired by the Almighty, and he may have used language that could be understood at the time instead of using language that could not be understood until Darrow was born." End quote. Cue laughter and applause. Not bad, you know? As I said, I still believe in evolution. There's nothing that will change that. Even if they found Noah's year-at-a-glance calendar on a pristinely preserved ark. And yes, I know there's artistic license and all that, but it does seem odd to me that this movie, which is supposed to be a champion for the truth, distorted the truth so much. Why do that, especially when you have reality on your side? I spend my last half hour at the museum bookshop. I flip through dinosaur books for kids, a Far Side-like cartoon book about the fallen world, biology books, and theology books. I spend several minutes skimming an astronomy book called Dismantling the Big Bang, which aims to expose the philosophical weakness of said theory. It makes me think of AIG's resident astrophysicist, Jason. Before I left, he wanted to make clear to me that he's not geocentric. He doesn't believe the Earth is the center of the universe. Does anyone anymore? I asked. He said, yes, there's a group called biblical astronomers. They believe that the Earth is stationary because the Bible says the Earth shall never be moved, Psalm 93, verse 1. Jason considers them an embarrassment. That was something I hadn't expected. Moderate creationists who view other creationists as too extreme. But it will turn out to be one of this year's big lessons. Moderation is a relative term. Thanks for listening, everyone. So, what do you think? Personally, being a Christian has definitely changed my perspective on Christianity. Hopefully it would. Before, I didn't see anything wrong with straight up telling a Christian to their face, if you believe anything in here, I don't know what to say to you. And now it's like a big ha-ha from the universe because I'm one of them. And I know I'm not an idiot. Just like how A.J. Jacobs saw the Creationists at the Creationist Museum were not stupid individuals. Period. Now, when it comes to mental gymnastics, I just don't bother with that. If I have a question about something in the Bible, I try to turn to scholarly articles, especially if I'm looking at something in the Old Testament. I prefer to go to a Jewish source. As some Christian resources, they do those mental gymnastics which discredit not just the religion, but themselves as professionals, at least in my opinion. Don't come for me. In the same way that AJ calls out the movie Inherit the Wind, I think it was called, for embellishing and making up things when they didn't have to, when reality is on their side, it's the same thing with Christianity for me. If you really believe this, if you really think that there is a God, then why are you arguing? God does not need you to argue for him. So just pray for the people them and move on. Here in the West, or at least in westernized cultures, you have freedom of religion. I can believe what I want to believe as a Christian, and someone else who is not a Christian can believe what they want to believe. And we're not hurting anybody. As long as you're not hurting anybody, what's the issue? Honestly, I don't like the feeling of being confused. So whatever speaks to me, whatever takes me out of that feeling of being confused, that's where I'm gonna go. But that's the whole spectrum of Christianity. I am not a Catholic, but I would agree with Ivan, AJ's friend, and it's interesting that at the Creationist Museum, where they argue that the Earth is 6,000 years old or less, they draw a distinction between what they believe and what someone who is geocentrist believes. Before becoming a Christian, I would put all these people in the same swimming pool of logical fallacy. But now, things have changed. Though I'm not a creationist and I don't ever see myself as becoming a creationist, I am a skeptical Christian. And that's where I'm at, to be honest. Yes, I am a Christian, but I'm a questioning Christian. I'm a Christian, but I am a questioning Christian. And I think that's how it's going to be forever. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give me a little thumbs up, subscribe if you are so inclined. And remember, I love you. God loves you. Bye-bye.